So a little bit about me and my background with being a connector, since that is the theme for today. I first got my education in being a connector in 2002. Many of you have already heard this story. I used to sell kitchen knives. Took a job selling kitchen knives in college after I'd just been recently laid off from a factory. And the first thing that they told us to do when we sat down in our sales training class was to write down a list of all the people that we knew. And being the introvert that I was, I had gone to my job at the factory, went home at night, played video games, and fell asleep. And that was my life. I had nothing even beginning to resemble a social life. So you can imagine when somebody asked me to write down all the names of people that I knew, I'm thinking, well, I couldn't be that many. They sent us home and said, okay, your homework tonight is to keep working on this list. And by the way, write their phone numbers down. So the unsuspecting person that I was, I'm thinking, gee, I wonder why we're writing these phone numbers down. Until that moment of realization came that, oh, wait a minute, they're not going to actually ask me to call these people, are they? But I ended up coming up with just over 300 people on my names list for that assignment. And there were a lot of things that surprised me when we went through the painful experience that ensued. I had to call people, and sometimes the call might go something kind of like this. Let's say if I was talking to Martin and say, Martin, how you doing, buddy? Great talking to you. Just calling to say hi. And that was kind of a characteristic of me at the time. Right. So Martin at some point would start to say,
what do you want?
Something's going on. What's this really about? So it's, oh, well, by the way, now that I think of it, I got this great job where I get to tell people about these great products. And, how about I just come over to your house? I got a 10 o'clock tomorrow or 2 o'clock on Friday. That's just the most awkward conversations you could possibly imagine. I used to sit there with my palms sweating with my phone and just put off dialing the phone for as long as humanly possible. But what happened was a lot of people said yes to the demonstration, surprisingly. And even though it was such a high-pressure sales pitch, some people actually bought knives. I sold about $2,000 worth of knives over the summer. They are really good knives, by the way. That's where I still have my set. You got to see them. They're really sharp. Okay. But at the end of the presentation, this came to be the best part, was asking for referrals. Now, this would be the part where I'd pull out a piece of paper. I'd say, okay, you got neighbors, right? You have family. You have aunts and uncles and cousins. How about you write down the 10 people that you know the best and give me their phone numbers, and then we're going to call them right here and now. This is how I was trained. We're going to call them right now. You're going to call them right now and tell them that I'm coming to give them a demonstration of kitchen knives. Yeah, let's just say those conversations didn't go too well. That was, and half the time, to be perfectly honest, I chickened out and didn't ask. And I think a lot of people kind of did that. But surprisingly, some people did give referrals, and some of the referrals actually answered the phone when I called and said yes to the demonstration. So there were a lot of surprises that came my way that summer. It was only one summer. I couldn't have stomached any more of it. But one of the things that surprised me was how many people that I'd known from the past hadn't really had any kind of recent contact with, but they were happy to take my calls when I called them. They were happy to help when I asked them to help. What they were not so happy about was when they discerned the purpose of my call. They weren't so thrilled about that, but at the same time, they were still a lot of times willing to help. And I realized that there was a vast network of opportunities and resources on the other end of the phone that up until that point in time in my life, I really hadn't been making use of. And that's when I started to see the value of being a connector. So what I'm going to talk to you about today in terms of being a connector, I'm not going to talk so much about the how to do it. I'm not going to talk about strategies and tips and tricks for being a connector. I really want to talk about the why. I want to talk about the purpose and the reasons for being a connector, because I'm not necessarily going to suggest that you do a lot of things differently, but that maybe you approach some of the things you're currently doing in the world of networking with a different purpose in the back of your mind. Because I think when you think of things this way, you're going to see a higher return on investment for the time that you put into your networking activity. Now, I'm going to use a conservative figure here. I'm going to say most of us know at least 250 people, and that's an extremely conservative figure. I just went through my contacts list earlier on this week when I was sending out an email about this event, and I have over 2,500 in my contacts list. And I would venture to say that most of the people in this room know at least 1,000, but we're going to use 250 as a conservative figure. So if you were to count up all the people that you know and all the people that they know, it's 250 times 250. Don't bother getting out your calculators. I've already worked it out. 62,500 people that are within one introduction of you. So that represents the network that you already have today if you did nothing else to go out and develop any new relationships. So in light of these big numbers, and in light of the fact that that is so easily within your reach, there are some things that don't really make a whole lot of sense about the way most people go about networking activity. And I specifically mean the fact that people go to networking events with the intention to meet as many strangers as possible. People think that whoever hands out the most business cards wins at the end of the day, or whoever has the most friends on Facebook or followers on Twitter. But networking is really not a body count game, but a lot of people act as if it was. And here's what the opportunity that gets missed a lot of the time. The people that are in those 250 you already know, and the people that are 1 degree of separation away from them, that represents the other 62,000. There's such a vast resource of knowledge, expertise, opportunities, all kinds of things that you could tap into there that a stranger is a lot less likely to help with. I mean, we tend to go to networking events thinking, well, if I just meet the right stranger at the right time, that person will have the opportunity I'm looking for. So the best way to increase my odds, well, if I go to an event and there's 500 people there, well, I got really good odds of meeting the right stranger. But the problem is, a lot of times the opportunity is right in our backyard, and we haven't even looked to the resources that we already have. And so to me, that's what networking is really about. It's not about increasing the number of cards in my Rolodex. It's about deepening the relationships with the people that I already know and making those relationships more meaningful. I'm not about to tell you that it's easy. That's not the point of this talk. I'm just going to tell you that it pays a high return on investment. Now, I'm going to read you a quote by Seth Godin. He's one of my favorite authors. Some of you may have heard of him. He wrote a book called Purple Cow and a number of other books, but he recently put up a blog post. This was last August, and he said, in the connection economy, there's a dividing line between the two kinds of projects, those that exist to create connections and those that don't. The internet is a connection machine. Virtually every single popular web project, eBay, Facebook, chat, email, forums, etc., exists to create connections between humans that were difficult or impossible to do before the web. When you tell us about your business or nonprofit or public works project, tell us first how it's going to help us connect. The rest will take care of itself. End quote. Being a connector is a career choice. I would actually suggest that if you put what you do second and put being a connector first, it's going to make things a lot easier when you go out and you meet people, because let's just say, for example, I use Richard. Richard is a general contractor, right?
Yes, sir.
Best one there is, right? Nobody can do your job. But the fact remains, I'm not really looking for anybody to build me a house right now. So even though Richard is the best general contractor there is, that doesn't necessarily add value to the immediate connection. But if you focus on being a connector, on the other hand, it doesn't matter what you do, because there's always value in being a connector. If you can introduce somebody on the basis that, hey, this person knows quality people, regardless of what their profession or their business is, that's somebody that people want to meet. So it just makes things a whole lot simpler. There's a couple of different reasons to become a connector, which are not necessarily obvious or intuitive. And one of the reasons I'm going to address is internal, and the other is external. What I describe as the internal or intrinsic reason to become a connector is that it increases your net personal power. Personal power, I mean things like confidence, I mean things like discipline, persistence, things that nobody has to agree with your right to have. Nobody has to give you permission to have them. Nobody has to grant you a title or authority or the ability to make decisions officially in any kind of capacity. It's not a function of your position in a hierarchy or anything along those lines. And in fact, the government couldn't even pass a law that would take them away. They're just absolute, like the law of gravity, and they don't go away once you have them. That's what I'm talking about when I say personal power. It's absolute, it's irrevocable. The second thing that I'm going to talk about, the external factor, is capacity to perform. So when I say capacity to perform, I mean the ability to fulfill on a goal that you have. And what is the extent, how big of a goal could you declare today and have it become realized tomorrow? That is essentially what defines your capacity to perform. So when you become a connector, your intention behind becoming a connector is to increase your personal power and increase your capacity to perform. You might think of it just like you're playing a sport, like playing baseball or any other sport. Even if the game's more fun when you win, right? But even if you lose, you still gain those benefits that you could be taken into a whole different situation, and a lot of what you learned in the sport would transfer. You could play baseball for a summer and take a job as a sales manager. On the one hand, you might say that the two have nothing to do with each other, but there's still going to be some skills that you can make use of from one and the other. So we're really talking about an ontological phenomenon, or a change in your way of being. I'll just get my notes organized here. I should have figured I'd get these out of order. All right, so an example of personal power, a practical example of how personal power applies, is negotiation in business. That could be a job interview, it could be a sales conversation. Wherever you're in a conversation that involves the exchange of goods and you're either one buying something or selling something, your ability to negotiate a favorable deal is a function of your personal power. It's not a function of your situation. Now, to give you an example, a couple of years back when I was doing freelance writing, I'm still trying to kind of learn the ropes of that and figure out how to negotiate a deal in business. I'd be sitting right across the table from somebody frankly thinking, if this client doesn't sign with me, I'm not going to be able to make my car payment next week. And when that's the case, people can see that written all over your face. They can see it in your body language, and it does nothing to strengthen your position. However, if you've developed a certain level of personal power, you can be in that exact same situation, and if you know with certainty that if this person says no, somebody else is going to say yes, so I'm not worried about it. When you have that level of detachment, that's now going to change the whole dynamic of the conversation. It's going to change the outcome considerably. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to think of a personal goal that you have, just to bring a little bit more personal relevancy into this talk for yourself. But don't do that yet, because what I want to do is distinguish 5 separate categories of a goal, and you're going to decide which bucket that your goal fits into. Think of these kind of like stages or levels that a goal goes through. First stage is what I call the fantasy stage. Just not going to happen. We'd be great, we'd love to do that, but it's just not possible. Good example is before Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. That was a fantasy. It was just not possible in the worldview of the people who looked at it. Second stage is the someday but not today stage. Something you definitely intend to do, but it just doesn't make practical sense to spend time on it right now. Like for me, my example is I definitely want to become fluent in Mandarin Chinese, not something I intend to do today. There's just too many other things I have going on. Stage 3 is what I call the planning stage. The planning stage is, okay, I'm gathering resources, I'm putting things together, but I'm not actually taking the steps yet towards the goal. And you might say, well, if I had X, I could start today. But you're really clear what the X is. That's what the planning stage. Stage 4 is learning the ropes. So learning the ropes is you're definitely taking the action towards the goals, but you haven't seen the results materialize yet. And because it's unfamiliar or new territory, you're not necessarily 100% clear about when you're going to see the results or what the magnitude of those results is going to look like. And stage 5, it's a done deal. I mean, you either have the results in hand or you can see very clearly in your mind's eye when the results are going to come. Seeds are planted. I'm clear that the harvest is coming, so it's a done deal. So again, it's stage 1, fantasy, stage 2, someday, stage 3, planning stage, 4, learning the ropes, 5 is a done deal. So I'm going to ask you to just picture, I'm not going to ask you to share this with anybody, but just picture in your mind something you have that's important to you, preferably something that's in stage 1 through stage 4, because we got nowhere to go from stage 5. That's already a done deal. And what we're going to do is not put together a plan for accomplishing a goal, because this really isn't a goal-setting type of a talk. Instead, we're going to think about what would it take to move it up a stage. So for example, if you have a goal that seems to be unrealistic or a fantasy, what would it take to make it realistic? Now hold that thought. Don't try to figure that out yet, because I'm going to give you another piece of a tool to work with, another lead in here. Remember I said that the second element of performance is the capacity to perform when you focus on being a connector. So there's 3 types of finite resources that we all have that we can all draw on. There's money, there's time, and there's energy. And energy is actually often overlooked because it is quite possible to have the money and time to do something but be physically burnt and just not have the capacity within your physical energy to do it. And it's also possible that you don't necessarily have the time and the money, but energy is actually the bottleneck, where if you had more energy you could devise a way to come up with the time and the money. But so all 3 of those are important. Now you also got to think about not only your own time, energy, and money, but think about that network of 62,500 people that you have immediate access to. Now, all 62,500 of them aren't going to give you all their time and energy and money. That'd be nice, but it doesn't really work that way. So what you want to think about is, to what extent today do you have the ability to draw on the finite resources of that network? In other words, if you have whatever goal that you've got in the back of your mind, is it money that would make the greatest difference in moving that up a level? Is it time, available time in your schedule that would make the greatest difference? Is it physical energy? And given whatever resource would make the greatest difference, could you draw on your network to avail yourself of someone else's resource? To what extent could you do that? Just a question to think about as we move through this. Now Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach the problem and the challenge that I just presented you when it comes to moving your goal up a level. A lot of different ways you could think about drawing on the resources of your network. But if you keep in mind what I said at the beginning of this talk, that your network consists of 62,500 people within 1 degree of separation. So if the challenge is not, how can I find strangers and get them to commit their resources to me, but how can I mine those resources effectively within my network, it's still not an easy challenge. But that's the framework we want to be thinking in. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you 3 action steps. I'm really not going to attempt to completely describe how to do this, but it's more of to give you a jump-off point if you're thinking, okay, well, how do I actually implement any of these things? This is really just more of a place to start than anything else. The first thing to do is pretty similar to what my training taught me to do when I sold knives. Believe it or not, there's some things I would not actually change about that training. There was a lot of good stuff, and a lot of people made a lot of money selling knives. I wasn't one of them. But there was a lot of value in some of the things that they taught us, just from the perspective of relationship building, if you come at it from a different angle. So I would say put together a list of the people you know, but not just necessarily everybody you know, but the people that bring the most relevance to the goal that you have. Who are the people that have the not only necessarily the resources, but the willingness and availability to help you? In fact, that's where I would start, is with willingness and availability. Who are the people where you've built up goodwill, where you've built up trust? You've heard about the know, like, and trust factor, and there's a couple of different perspectives on that. Some people say people do business with people they know, like, and trust. Well, and that's kind of halfway true, but not really, because there's a lot more to it than that. So what I'm going to suggest that you start with is use know, like, and trust as a foundation, but you've got to have some strategy and build on top of that. But you've got to start with the who instead of starting with the what. Who are the people that can help you accomplish your goal? You also want to think about attitude and motivation. You don't want to focus on a list of people that are negative and complain all the time. So you also want to do what we did before. You've already done the other step, which is starting and selecting a goal. So step 2 is select a goal and only one goal. But let me clarify this a little bit. I would strongly suggest that you pick something that is the top of your priority list and will remain at the top of your priority list until you accomplish it. And you all know a lot of good reasons for being single-minded about your goals, so I'm not going to rehash what you've heard before. But I will say that specifically in the context of networking, there's another reason why you want to be single-minded about your goal. Because think about what happens if I tell Martin I've got one goal, I tell Richard I have another goal, I tell Ellen I have some other goal, I tell Amy something else. People are going to get really confused. Nobody knows this better than me because I've done that before. I've been the king of goals changing.
I thought Dave was.
Yeah, exactly. So the importance of being single-minded is having a clear, consistent, and cohesive message that you put out to the different audiences, because the more easy you make it for people to help you, the more likely it is they're going to do it. See, it's not that people aren't willing to help, but the problem is most of the time people just don't really know how to help. You know, if you come to me and say, well, I know how you can help me get me some customers, frankly, that's not really that easy for me to do. If I'm going to spend all day making cold calls on your behalf to try and get you customers, well, I'd really just be doing your business myself at that point. If I wanted to be in your business, I already would be. So think about ways to make it easy to help, and the more single-minded you are about your goal, the easier that becomes. Now, you may not know what would actually make it easy for somebody to help, and that's where the purpose of the conversation comes in. What I'm going to invite you to do for the next step in this process is create a short list. And what I mean by short list, the key word is short. So it's 3 to 6 people. If you were to go through your entire list of everybody you know and rank those and score those people by whatever methodology you like to do, or it may just be intuitive, you may already know who the top 3 to 6 people are, but the people that are most willing and most available to help and most willing to get behind you and believe in your ability to accomplish the goal, who would those 3 to 6 people be? Ask yourself that question. Again, it comes back to resources, it comes back to a lot of different factors, but if you start with your whole list of people, you may just start to get a good idea of that. Now, there's your theory on who those 3 to 6 people are and the reality of who they actually are, which may change based on how you have your conversations with them. So when I sold kitchen knives, they said, okay, you're going to call everybody on your list. I'm not going to recommend that you necessarily call everybody on your list. I would recommend that you filter it down and maybe narrow it down to top 100, top 50, top 20, whatever number feels good for you is not overwhelming. Start having a conversation about what your goals are and what help and resources you could use that would help accomplish those goals, and watch how responsive people are. You're going to notice that some people will return your phone calls immediately, some people will volunteer and offer to do all kinds of things for you, some people may just blow you off, and you're going to make notes about that. That's really what you're going to pay attention to, is the responsiveness, and see, and just kind of feel out the energy of it too. Figure out which interactions are the most positive and which ones seem to be the most beneficial.
Dave?
Yes?
You said to do that with the really short list?
Yes.
Or
Well,
the culled down list to about 100? Or...
Well, the goal is to come up with a short list. So you may start with the 100 or the 50 or whatever, but the goal is to get to 3 to 6. That's the idea. And that's going to change over time. I mean, I've known people over the past few years. My short list has turned over entirely a couple of times. There's not many people that have stayed on my list for a long time, but and that's just life. I mean, people's situations change. People move out of town. They need different things. They want different things. And the challenge with building a short list is not necessarily coming up with names of people. The challenge is creating value for them in the relationship, making them want to stay engaged with you, bad enough that they'll always take your phone calls and offer to do things for you. That's really the challenge, and it's not easy. Like I said before, this is not an easy thing. This is a lifetime commitment. And the last step that I'm going to prescribe is create some kind of a structure or a schedule for staying in touch with these people on your list. It could be a phone call daily. I know people have done that. I've done that with people that were on my short list previously. It could be a group conference call. It could be a group in-person, eyeball-to-eyeball meeting. It could be even things with social media. It's a matter of what you prefer, what works for you, and it's a matter of what works for them. But the important thing is to have some kind of plan for how you're going to stay in touch. And it could be formal, it could be loosely structured. I mean, I have one friend who told me that pick up the phone and call anytime, but don't ask me to commit to anything. So I'm paraphrasing. But I was like, okay, that's fine, I'm clear. You just got to know what works for people. And then some people have told me, if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. So it better be formal and structured and scheduled. So there's no universal answer that works for everybody. It's just about having some kind of a framework for staying in touch. The important thing about your short list, your 3 to 6 people, is that you've got to be comfortable with sharing your most private and sensitive things that you wouldn't necessarily want to broadcast to the world with those 3 to 6 people. Who are the people that you have the highest level of trust with? You know, it could be something like you're thinking about making a major life change and you're maybe not necessarily sure. Some of the value that I've gotten from people that were on my short list over the years is if I just need to get my head screwed on straight, and I was not necessarily in a position of strength. One of the things that I've learned is that my own strength can get tapped out at times, but when I know how to reach out to the right lifelines, I can get my strength built back up. See, the thing about networking and being a connector is it's not so much about the resources that you have as much as it's about your ability to create those resources if you had to start over tomorrow. So think of this not as a path to accomplishing a goal, but as a set of practices. Think of it as a game like baseball, that if you do these 3 things and you master these skills, we could take you out of here and drop you in a city tomorrow, take away all your money and your possessions, and put you in front of people that have never heard of you. You could start over tomorrow and do it all over again. And in fact, that's what I did personally. I came here to Raleigh in 2007, did not know a soul in this town. And when I started, it took me about 3 months to develop between 300 to 500 contacts. So again, that's further evidence to say that 250 is a very conservative number. If you add up the people in this room, and I always count the head count, I just do this instinctively, we got 31 people in here today. So that means we have close to 2 million people in the network within 1 degree of separation of the people in this room. So you don't have to go outside this room at all to get all the resources that you need to accomplish whatever goal that you have. You could stay right within this room and find access to all the knowledge, all the expertise, all the opportunity, all the connections. So the challenge is learning how to really drill down, and that's why I really emphasize short in the word short list. Because if you start with small, hyper-focused, laser-concentrated mentality, that's how you can actually create exponential or geometric results. If you go about this thinking, well, I'm going to stay in touch with 500 people and make sure that all 500 of them are in touch with my goals, the problem with doing that is you're going to spread yourself too thin, because you just can't build meaningful relationships with that many people all at the same time. But I want you to think about this a different way. If you focus on building really strong relationships with those 3 to 6 people and carry that a step further and help them do what you just did, help them do what you're doing, then you're effectively creating a framework for exponential results, because now they'll be reaching out to 3 to 6 people that they know. See, these people don't necessarily need to know each other. They don't need to know that they're on some list or in some system. It's not about calling somebody and say, hey, it's been 30 days since we reviewed your insurance policy, so how about we have a conversation about what you could buy from... No, I'm not talking about that. This is not some kind of formalized mechanical process. This is a people thing. It's not a process thing. So I'll review those 3 steps one more time. The first thing you want to do is define a goal, only one goal, be single-minded about that one goal. The second thing is put together your short list of 3 to 6 people. And the third thing is put together a structure for staying in touch with those 3 to 6 people and deepening those relationships. You do that, and I can guarantee you that any goal that you ever have will become much easier to accomplish. It may not happen overnight, but the return on investment is going to be considerably higher than any activity that you go about trying to accomplish it by yourself. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what being a connector is all about. Thank you.
Great.